The stranger at the door. It was a cold night on the edge of Colony Vesta 9. The wind howled through the dry fields and dust blew across the empty farm roads. Mark had just finished his meal and was cleaning his tools when he heard a knock at the door. Not a loud knock, but soft. Like someone afraid to be heard, he paused, confused. Since no one ever visited him this late, grabbing his old plasma torch just in case, he walked toward the door. When he opened it, what he saw made him freeze for a second. A tall alien woman stood in the rain, soaked and shivering. Her skin was a soft silver blue, her eyes large and glowing faintly green in the dark. She held something in her arms, covered in cloth, then the cloth moved. A small child peeked out from beneath it. Scared and quiet, the woman lowered her hood and spoke in a soft voice. "I'm sorry to disturb you, human, but we need help." Mark stared at her, unsure. He had seen her species before, Silani, known for their grace, their old war and their tragedies. But they were rare out here and never came alone. He looked at the child again, bare feet, thin arms, empty eyes. The woman continued, "We don't want trouble, we just want shelter. I can work, clean, cook, anything." Mark stepped aside, letting the light fall on them more clearly. He could see the tiredness in her face, the dirt on her clothes, and the way she clutched the child tightly. The kid didn't even cry, just looked at Mark like a ghost. "What's your name?" Mark asked quietly. "Lyria," she replied, "and this is my son, Rian." He hesitated, then asked, "Where's the father?" Her lips trembled. "Gone years ago in the war." Mark looked out at the night, then back at her. He didn't need more people on his land, but something inside him shifted. Maybe it was the child's eyes. Maybe it was the loneliness in Lyria's voice. Maybe he was just tired of eating alone. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. She looked surprised, then bowed her head deeply. "Thank you." Inside, the warm air made the child sigh in relief. Mark handed them dry towels, then poured some hot soup into 2 bowls. They sat quietly as Rian sipped slowly, his hands shaking from cold and hunger. Lyria watched her son eat. Her own bowl untouched, Mark sat across the table, not speaking, just watching. "Where are you coming from?" he finally asked. "Refugee ship." "It broke down 2 sectors away," she said. "No credits, no food. Just walking." Mark leaned back, thinking. This wasn't the first time war had broken lives. He had seen too many people left behind, humans and aliens alike. "I can't pay you," he said bluntly. "I don't need money," she replied. "Just a roof, and maybe a little kindness." Those words hit him harder than expected. He nodded. "You can sleep in the spare room. Start working tomorrow." She smiled for the first time, a soft, tired smile that looked strange on her alien face but somehow familiar that night after they went to sleep. Mark sat alone outside on the porch. The wind was softer now, and the stars above were bright. He stared up at them, wondering what he had just invited into his life. He didn't believe in fate or signs, but something about her felt different. Not dangerous, but heavy, like a path had shifted under his feet. Inside, Lyria sat next to her sleeping son, her hand gently stroking his hair. She looked around the small room, bare, cold, but safe. Tears slid down her face as she whispered, "Thank you," to no one. Then she touched her own chest, over a small glowing mark, one that only her kind could feel. It pulsed once, quietly. Her species bonded not with words, but through emotion, protection, and trust, and tonight, for the first time in years, her heart had pulsed again. Outside, Mark lit a small lamp and placed it on the windowsill. A habit he had kept from his childhood. It meant someone is home. He didn't know why he did it that night, but he did, and somehow, far away in her soul, Lyria felt it. The first sign of belonging, the first light in a long, dark journey. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the fields of Vesta 9. The red sky stretched across the farm, and small dust clouds danced in the wind. Mark stepped out onto the porch, expecting silence like every other morning. But today there was movement. Lyria was already awake. Carrying water from the pump, she moved with grace, but her arms shook slightly under the heavy bucket. Her clothes were still damp, but she didn't complain. Rian sat nearby on an old wooden crate, quietly watching a small group of birds pecking at seeds. "You don't have to start so early," Mark said, walking over. Lyria looked up, her silver blue skin glowing faintly in the morning light. "I said I would work." "And I will," she answered calmly. He nodded, impressed. "Then let me show you around." He guided her through the barn. the tool shed and the crops. She listened carefully, asking questions when needed, never interrupting. When Mark showed her how to feed the grain goats, she was gentle with them. The animals were nervous at first. They had never smelled an alien so close, but they slowly came near. Later, she helped clean the solar panels on the roof, her hands steady even on the ladder. Rian helped by holding the tools. His tiny voice saying, "Careful, Mama," whenever the wind blew. Mark watched them from below, arms crossed. He couldn't believe how quickly she adapted. By noon, she had already cleaned the kitchen, sorted supplies, and started preparing lunch. The smell of warm food filled the house, alien spices mixed with local vegetables. Mark sat at the table, surprised by the taste. "This is really good," he said, and she gave a small smile. "I used to cook for many, before the war," she said softly. He didn't ask more, but he noticed her eyes go distant, like she was remembering people she'd lost. Over the next few days, things slowly changed around the farm. Mark no longer ate alone. In the evening, Rian would sit beside him. Asking about earth animals or human machines, Lyria cleaned, fixed, and worked like someone trying to rebuild her soul piece by piece. One evening, as the sun set behind the hill, Mark found her in the garden planting seeds. "Why are you planting now?" he asked. "The ground's not soft enough." She looked up and said, "Back home we used heat-root plants to soften the soil. I think they'll grow here too." Mark crouched beside her, watching her hands move the dirt gently. "You miss your home?" he asked. She paused, then nodded. Every night the next morning, trouble came. 2 neighbors, humans, arrived unannounced. One of them, a stocky man named Traeger, looked Lyria up and down with clear disgust. "You really let one of them live here?" he said to Mark. "She's working, she's helping, what's your problem?" Mark replied. The second man, older and quieter, added, "Just be careful, Mark. Folks around here don't trust Zelani." Mark crossed his arms. "I trust what I see, and what I see is a mother doing her best." After they left, Lyria stood in silence, her hands trembling slightly. "I can leave if it causes you trouble," she said. Not looking at him, Mark shook his head. "You're not going anywhere." That night, Lyria sat near the window watching the stars. Mark walked over with 2 mugs of hot brew. Handing one to her, they didn't speak at first. Just listened to the quiet. Rian was asleep in the next room, hugging an old stuffed creature Mark had found in storage. "You could have said no that night," Lyria finally whispered. Mark looked at her. "I could have, but I didn't want to." "Why?" she asked. "You owe me nothing." Mark sipped his drink and replied, "Maybe I was just tired of being alone." She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the stars outside. "Me too," she said, almost in a whisper as the days passed. Something unspoken grew between them. It wasn't romance, not yet, but something deeper. They worked side by side, ate together, shared silence and sometimes laughter. Rian started calling Mark Uncle Mark and followed him everywhere. He even helped fix the fence, proudly holding a nail while Mark hammered it in. "Good job, kid," Mark said, and Rian's face lit up like sunrise. One afternoon, while they were fixing a solar pipe, their hands touched briefly. Just a second, nothing more. But Lyria pulled back quickly. Her face surprised. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" She shook her head. "No, just, your touch feels warm." He didn't know what she meant, but her cheeks turned a soft lavender color. Something he'd learned meant she was nervous. He didn't press further, but her reaction stayed in his mind all night. That evening, as they stood outside watching a rare comet cross the sky, Mark whispered, "You and Rian, you belong here." Lyria looked at him, eyes wide, as if she wasn't sure she heard him right. Then slowly she nodded. "Maybe for the first time in years. We do." The sky over Vesta 9 lit up in bright colors. It was the start of the yearly Unity Festival, a time when humans and aliens celebrated peace, trade, and new beginnings. Though it was a small colony, people worked hard to decorate the square with lanterns, music towers, and glowing ribbons. Food stalls lined the streets, and the scent of roasted grains, alien spices, and sweet earth fruit filled the air. Mark stood on the porch of his farmhouse, watching the orange lights flicker in the distance. He turned to Lyria, who stood nearby holding Rian's hand. "You sure you want to go?" he asked, adjusting his jacket. Lyria looked down at her son, who was bouncing excitedly. Rian's eyes sparkled like he had waited his whole life for this. "I don't want him to miss it," she said softly. Even if they stare, Mark nodded. Let them stare, he said. They'll get used to it. Lyria wore a long traditional Zalani wrap, woven with silver threads and soft blue fabric. She hadn't worn it in years, but today, she wanted her son to see what pride looked like. Rian wore a tiny scarf around his neck, the symbol of peace in her culture. Mark offered his arm as they walked, and though hesitant at first, Lyria took it. As they reached the festival, people turned, some whispered, others froze, but no one spoke loud enough to challenge them. Mark greeted a few familiar faces, acting calm as if nothing was unusual. They passed a few booths, played small games with Rian, and even bought a glowing flower toy for him. For a while it almost felt normal until she arrived. A woman named Dana, an old neighbor of Mark's, walked over. Holding a drink, she smiled, but her words were sharp. So, this is your new helper, huh? Pretty bold, Mark. Mark kept his tone neutral. She's not just a helper, she's family now. Dana raised her eyebrows. Family? Really? What would your father say, bringing a Zalani into your home? Lyria gently pulled Rian closer, her hand trembling. Mark stepped forward, voice steady. My father taught me to judge by actions, not species, Dana scoffed and walked away, leaving a thick silence behind. Lyria turned to Mark, her voice low. You didn't have to defend me. I wanted to, he said simply. And I'll do it again, later that evening. Music filled the square. Humans and aliens danced together. Though some kept to their own groups, a firework burst in the sky, bright green and gold, and Rian clapped excitedly. He tugged on Lyria's hand. Mama, dance! Lyria smiled but hesitated, unsure. Mark extended his hand. Come on, let's show them how it's done, she laughed. A real soft laugh, and placed her hand in his. They danced gently, nothing grand, just swaying to the rhythm. People watched, but no one interrupted. Some smiled, some looked away, but no one stopped them. Rian spun around in joy, holding his glowing toy for a moment. They weren't human or Zalani. They were just a family enjoying the night. After the music faded and the crowd moved to watch the fire show, Mark and Lyria walked away from the noise. They sat on a quiet hill overlooking the town, stars twinkling above. It was a good night, Mark said. Lying back on the grass, Lyria sat beside him, watching the sparks dance in the sky. I forgot what peace feels like, she whispered. You deserve peace, Mark replied. You and Rian both. There was a long pause. Then Lyria spoke again. Where I come from. Bonding is sacred, we don't open our hearts easily. Mark turned his head toward her. And have you opened yours? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Instead, she laid back beside him, her head gently resting near his shoulder. The stars above glowed brighter, as if they too had been waiting for this moment. When they returned home that night, Rian was asleep in Mark's arms. Lyria tucked him into bed and kissed his forehead. Mark stood by the door watching her. You're a good mother, he said. She turned to him, a strange emotion in her eyes. I used to be a wife too. Mark looked down. Do you miss him? I miss what we were, she said quietly. But that part of me died long ago. Then she added almost in a whisper, and maybe something new is growing now. Mark didn't reply, but he stepped forward and took her hand gently. She didn't pull away this time. The touch was soft, but it held meaning. Up in the sky, the last firework exploded, one large golden spark that hung for a long time before fading. Neither of them looked up. They only looked at each other. The clouds rolled in without warning, dark and heavy. They spread across the red sky like spilled ink. Mark looked up from the field, wiping sweat from his forehead. Storm's coming, he muttered, watching the wind stir the dry crops. Lyria stood nearby, her hands dirty from planting. She looked at the sky and nodded slowly. It's not just any storm, it smells electric. She was right by nightfall. The wind had turned violent, shaking the walls of the farmhouse. Lightning cracked across the sky and thunder followed so loud it made the windows rattle. Inside, Rian clung to his mother, wide-eyed. He had never seen a human storm before. Mark ran from room to room, securing tools and locking doors. Then he heard a loud bang. The wind had torn the barn door open. Stay inside, he shouted to Lyria, grabbing his jacket and running into the chaos. Rain pelted him like stones as he fought to close the barn door. A metal sheet flew loose, and before he could move, it struck his shoulder hard. Pain shot through his arm, but he gritted his teeth and kept working. Suddenly, another bolt of lightning struck nearby, blinding him for a second. The smell of ozone filled the air. Lyria appeared out of the dark, ignoring the rain. "Mark," she cried, rushing to his side. "You shouldn't be out here." He shouted, "You're hurt," she said, grabbing his arm. Together they secured the barn door and hurried back inside, soaked to the bone. Inside, Rian rushed over. "Uncle Mark, you're bleeding!" Mark winced as Lyria guided him to sit down. She tore a clean cloth and pressed it to his shoulder, her hands fast but gentle. "I'll get the med kit," he said. Trying to stand. "No," she whispered. "Let me try something." She opened her small travel pouch and pulled out a handful of glowing green leaves. She crushed them between her fingers, releasing a sharp scent. "Hold still," she said firmly, dabbing the mixture onto his wound. He hissed in pain, but then the heat faded, replaced by a cool sensation. Mark looked at her, surprised. "You know healing?" "My mother taught me before the war," she said. "We didn't always have machines." Later that night, the storm calmed, but inside the house, everything felt different. Mark lay on the couch, half asleep. His arm bandaged neatly, Lyria sat nearby. Watching him in silence, finally she spoke. "You could have died tonight." He opened one eye and gave a small smile. "But I didn't." She moved closer, her voice low. "You didn't have to save the barn." "I didn't want to lose the animals," he replied. "Or the food or the tools. But you risked your life," she whispered. Mark looked into her glowing eyes. "Maybe some things are worth the risk." A long silence followed, heavy but full of meaning. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his chest. He felt a strange warmth spread through him, not physical, but deep emotional. Her voice shook slightly. "I have to tell you something. Something about my kind," Mark sat up. "What is it?" She looked down, unsure. "We don't bond with just anyone. When a Zilani touches someone in trust, it starts a connection." Mark blinked. "You mean like emotions?" She nodded slowly. "Stronger than that?" "It's biological, spiritual. Once the bond begins, it grows," his heart pounded. "And have you started this bond with me?" She didn't answer right away, but then her fingers gently laced with his. "I think I already have," she whispered. Mark didn't pull away. He only whispered, "Then I guess I'm bonded too." Her eyes welled up, but she smiled. "I've been feeling strange lately," she admitted. "Tired, warm, hungry at odd times." Mark tilted his head. "Sounds like stress." "No," she said, touching her stomach lightly. "It might be something else." Silence filled the room as realization sank in. "You think?" Mark began, but his voice stopped. "I think I'm pregnant," Lyria said, her voice barely above a breath. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He stood slowly, walking to the window and staring out at the last flashes of lightning in the distance. He didn't speak for a while, and Lyria stood quietly behind him. Finally, he turned. "How do you feel about it?" "I'm scared," she said, "but also hopeful." Mark walked to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll figure this out," he said. Together. That night, as Rian slept peacefully in his room, Mark and Lyria sat side by side in the quiet. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside, a new life was just beginning. The next morning, the storm was gone, but something else had begun to stir across the colony. Something colder than wind. Whispers, suspicion, fear. Word spread fast in a small place like Vesta 9, and soon people were murmuring at the market, pointing at the farm from a distance. "She's still there? He lets her sleep in the house? I heard he touches her like she's his own." Inside the farmhouse, Mark boiled tea, pretending not to hear the outside noise. But Lyria heard it all. Her sensitive ears picked up every whispered insult, every cruel rumor. She didn't say anything, though. She just stood by the window, hand resting gently on her stomach. Her other hand brushed through Rian's hair as he played with a wooden toy. "Mark," she said quietly, "people are starting to hate you because of me." Mark looked up. "They hated me before too. Just didn't say it out loud." "That's not true," she said. "They respected you." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "And now they fear what they don't understand." "I won't run from that," but by afternoon things got worse. A government inspection truck pulled up on the dusty road. Two men in black uniforms stepped out, one holding a digital clipboard, the other armed. They knocked hard, their boots heavy against the porch. Mark opened the door, calm but alert. "Mark Dallin?" The officer asked. "That's me," Mark replied. "We've received complaints regarding an undocumented Zilani residing on your property." Mark crossed his arms. "She's not undocumented. She's a survivor." The officer didn't blink. "That may be, but this colony requires full registration of all non-human residents. She's pregnant, Mark said firmly. And she's staying. The second officer stepped forward. Hand near his weapon. Then you may be violating colony law. Behind them, Lyria appeared in the doorway holding Rian close. She didn't speak, didn't plead. She only stood tall even as her hands shook. The first officer glanced at her. Then at the child he tapped his device. We'll be back, he said coldly. And if she's not properly registered, there will be consequences. As the truck drove away, a silence fell over the house like a heavy blanket. Rian looked up at Mark. Are they going to take Mom away? Mark knelt in front of him, holding his small shoulders. No, buddy. No one's taking her. Later that night, Lyria packed a small bag. I can't stay here, she said, not meeting Mark's eyes. You're not leaving, he said, stepping in front of her. If they arrest you, what happens to Rian? To the baby? She asked, voice cracking. I don't care about the rules, Mark said. I care about you. She looked up, her eyes filled with emotion. I've never had someone choose me over their own safety. Mark took her hand gently. Then get used to it. He spent the next 2 days working non-stop. He called an old contact from the inner colonies, a lawyer who specialized in alien human rights. He filed emergency bond registration papers, rare but legal. It was a long shot, but he didn't stop until it was done. Meanwhile, Lyria stayed close to the house. Avoiding the town one morning, a group of humans gathered outside the farm fence. They didn't carry weapons, but their faces were hard. Mark walked out alone. His coat flapping in the wind, a woman in the group spoke first. We just want to know what you're doing, Mark. I'm building a life, he said calmly. One that includes her. She's not one of us, the woman said. She's not a threat either, he replied. She works harder than any of you, and she asks for nothing, someone else shouted. You're choosing her over your own kind, Mark nodded. Yeah, because my kind should mean doing what's right, not just what's easy slowly. The crowd turned and left, not convinced, but also not ready to fight a man who stood like a wall. That evening, Lyria sat by the window again. Mark walked in and placed a small carved figure on the table, a gift for Rian. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. You've given up everything for us, she whispered. Mark shook his head. I've gained more than I lost. She stood, walked over and gently placed his hand over her belly. A soft pulse beat under his palm, life growing quietly inside her. He looked into her eyes and said softly, You're not a guest here anymore, Lyria. This is your home now. Spring arrived early on Vesta 9. The harsh winds softened, and the land slowly began to bloom again. Mark's farm, once quiet and lonely, now echoed with life, laughter, footsteps, the sound of hope. Inside the small home, Lyria sat near the window, sewing tiny clothes with careful hands. Her belly had grown round and full, and every movement inside reminded her of what was coming. Rian ran through the house with his wooden spaceship toy. Making zooming sounds, Mark followed behind, pretending to be a space monster, roaring playfully. Lyria laughed, a sound that had become more common now. It no longer carried the weight of sorrow. It was light, free, real. Outside, Mark had painted the small shed into a nursery. He added shelves, soft lights, and even hand-carved a crib. The walls were decorated with both earth patterns and Zelani symbols. One night, Lyria walked in and froze at the sight. You made this? She whispered, her eyes wide. Mark nodded. For our daughter. She stepped closer, her hand gently brushing the wooden edge of the crib. She'll grow up between two worlds, she said. Mark smiled. Or maybe she'll create her own. Meanwhile, the papers Mark had filed weeks ago finally arrived. A message from the Central Colony Office declared the emergency bond registration approved. Mark was now listed as her protector under human law, and Lyria's unborn child was recognized as a dual citizen. It was rare, almost unheard of, but legal. Mark held the message in shaking hands and looked at Lyria with a grin. We did it, he said. She stood in silence for a moment, then threw her arms around him. Rian laughed and hugged both of them from behind. But not everyone was happy. Some villagers still avoided them, muttering cold things behind closed doors until the day Rian got hurt. He had wandered near the grain mill while Mark was repairing a solar panel. A machine sparked and scared him, making him trip and fall down the slope. His leg twisted, and he screamed loud enough for the entire field to hear. Mark dropped everything and ran. Lyria heard the scream from inside and rushed out barefoot. Heart pounding. They reached him at the same time. Mark scooping him up. Lyria checking his leg with trembling fingers. It was swollen badly. "We need help," Mark said. Lifting the boy carefully, they rushed him to the local medic's hut. The same place that once turned them away without words. This time, the door opened wide. An older woman named Marin, a retired doctor, took one look at Rian and nodded. "Put him down here," she said, her voice firm but kind. She worked fast, scanning his leg and wrapping it tightly. Lyria watched with panic, tears on her cheeks. "He'll be fine," Marin said. "Just a small fracture." "Nothing serious," Lyria broke down crying. But not from fear, from relief. Mark stood beside her, holding her hand before they left. Marin pulled Mark aside. "I was wrong," she said. "I judged too quickly." Mark raised an eyebrow. "What changed your mind?" "The way you both ran to him," Marin said. "The way she held him like her whole world was breaking." "That's because he is," Mark replied. Smiling the next day, something unexpected happened. Neighbors who once kept their distance brought food and soft blankets for Lyria. One man even dropped off a small stuffed creature for the baby. They didn't say much, but their actions spoke louder than words. Later that week, the colony council sent a message. Mark and Lyria were invited to attend the Harvest Day gathering. Officially, as a family, they hadn't been invited to anything before. Lyria was stunned. "Do you think they've really accepted us?" Mark nodded slowly. "They're learning." That night, Rian lay on his bed, his leg propped up and healing. Lyria sat beside him, humming a soft alien lullaby. Mark leaned in the doorway, watching them. "You're amazing with him," he said softly. She looked up. "He saved me long before you did." Mark walked in, sat beside her and placed his hand over her belly again. The baby kicked, strong and alive. "She's almost here," Lyria whispered. "I know," Mark said, his voice filled with something deep and unspoken. Then in the soft silence he added, "I've been thinking, after she's born, maybe we should make it official." Lyria blinked. "What do you mean?" Mark smiled nervously. "I mean, will you be my wife?" She stared at him, shocked, tears filling her eyes. Then with a smile that lit up her whole face, she whispered, "Yes." The baby came early, just before dawn. The sky outside was still dark, lit only by the twin moons of Vesta 9. Mark was half asleep on the couch when he heard Lyria cry out from the bedroom. He jumped up, heart pounding, and ran to her side. "It's time," she whispered, holding her belly, breathing hard. Mark didn't wait. He activated the emergency alert on his comm and called the medic. Then he held her hand and whispered, "You're strong, you can do this." She nodded, sweat on her forehead, pain in her eyes, but determination in her soul. Rian woke up, rubbing his eyes. Confused and scared, Mark knelt beside him. "It's okay, kiddo. Your baby sister is coming." Rian's eyes widened. "Now." Mark smiled. "Right now, soon." The house filled with quiet urgency. Marin, the older medic, arrived with a hover stretcher and 2 assistants. They moved quickly, guiding Lyria through every breath. Every contraction. Mark never let go of her hand. Not even once. Hours passed slowly, filled with whispers, pain, and hope. Then, as the sun began to rise behind the hills, a small cry filled the room. High-pitched, soft but strong, full of life. "She's here," Marin said. Holding the tiny newborn in her arms, she had soft human skin, but faint silver-blue markings across her forehead. Her eyes blinked open, and they glowed with the faint green light of her Zilani heritage. Lyria wept, overwhelmed with joy and exhaustion. Mark stared in wonder, unable to speak. He reached out and gently touched the baby's hand. It wrapped around his finger, holding tight. Rian peeked in from the hallway, eyes wide. Mark motioned for him to come closer. "This is your sister," he said. "She's part of you now." Rian smiled shyly and touched her tiny fingers. "She's small?" Lyria smiled weakly. "So were you once." Marin handed the baby to Lyria, who cradled her close. Mark sat beside them, one arm around Lyria, the other around Rian. "What should we name her?" he asked gently. Lyria looked at the child, then at Mark. "In my language, there's a name that means hope reborn. Soraya." Mark repeated it softly. "Soraya," Rian whispered it too, like a secret spell, and just like that she had a name. News of the birth spread fast, but this time, it didn't bring judgment, it brought celebration. Neighbors came with gifts, small blankets, toys, even food. Some came just to see her, to say they were sorry, to offer smiles and warm words. The same people who once whispered from a distance now stood on the porch, asking if they could hold the baby. The Colony Council sent an official message for the first time ever. A human Zilani child was born on Vesta 9. And not just born, welcomed. Mark decided it was time. He invited everyone to the farm for a naming ceremony, blending Earth and Zilani tradition. He built a small wooden platform in the garden and decorated it with flowers and glowing crystals. Lyria wore her ceremonial robe, and Mark wore a clean shirt with Zilani patterns embroidered by hand. Rian stood proudly beside them, holding a small stone carved with Soraya's name. The whole colony showed up, humans and aliens, young and old, all gathered under the morning sun. Mark stood before them and spoke in a clear voice. "Many of you didn't understand at first, and maybe I didn't either," he said. "But love doesn't ask what species you are." He looked at Lyria, then at Soraya. "It only asks if you're willing to care, to protect, and to believe." And then he raised Soraya for all to see, and the crowd cheered. After the ceremony, people stayed, laughing, talking, sharing stories. The farm that once stood in silence was now alive with joy. Children played, elders shared wisdom, and cultures blended in small but beautiful ways. Later, as the sun began to set, Mark and Lyria sat on the porch. Soraya asleep in her arms, Rian lay nearby, curled up with his toy ship. "You changed everything," Lyria whispered. Watching the horizon, Mark shook his head. "No, we did this together." She leaned against him, tired but peaceful. "I never thought I'd find a home again," she said. Mark kissed her forehead and replied, "Home isn't where you're from, it's where you're loved." As the stars appeared in the sky, Soraya stirred slightly and let out a soft sound. Mark smiled. "She's dreaming already." "Of two worlds," Lyria said, "and a future neither of us expected." And in that quiet moment, under a sky full of stars, a family once broken and scattered stood whole again, not by blood alone, but by choice, by kindness, by love.